Long before the Midwest was fully mapped, before borders were fixed and cities were built, French missionaries traveled deep into the interior of North America. They came to convert, they came to document, and they wrote everything down. In the 1600s and early 1700s, Jesuit missionaries moved through what was then called New France, a vast region that included parts of present-day Michigan, Wisconsin, Ontario, and the Great Lakes Basin. Their letters and reports were sent back to Europe and later compiled into what we now call the Jesuit Relations. These were not fictional tales. They were annual reports, accounts of geography, language, climate, encounters, and daily survival in what European readers considered the edge of the known world. But among descriptions of rivers and conversions, something else appears. Creatures, large ones, sometimes described as serpents in the water, sometimes as immense beasts in forests, sometimes as animals that did not behave like any species familiar to European observers. In several entries, missionaries record accounts of enormous fish in the Great Lakes, fish of such size that they seemed almost unnatural. Some descriptions suggest sturgeon of extreme proportions. Others describe creatures whose size and behavior blur into something less identifiable. Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron. These waters were vast, unpredictable, and largely unmapped at the time. European travelers had no frame of reference for inland seas on this scale, and when indigenous guides warned of powerful beings in certain waters or forests, the missionaries wrote it down, not always as literal truth, but as reported belief. In some reports, forest animals are described as having extraordinary strength or size. Moose, bears, and elk appeared far larger to Europeans unfamiliar with North American wildlife. A moose, standing over 6 feet at the shoulder, could easily seem monstrous to someone who had never seen one before. But other descriptions are harder to categorize. Some accounts reference serpentine forms seen moving across water surfaces. Others describe creatures that seem to combine features of known animals. It is important to understand the context. These missionaries were trained observers. Many were educated, literate, and methodical. They were not writing folklore collections. They were writing reports for sponsors, superiors, and European audiences interested in the geography and potential of New France. At the same time, they were operating in unfamiliar ecosystems. The Great Lakes region in the 1600s was heavily forested, lightly mapped, and ecologically dense. Visibility was limited. Weather shifted quickly. Sound traveled strangely over water. Fear and uncertainty were constant companions. The Jesuit Relations frequently include phrases like, "it is said," or "the natives believe," showing that missionaries often distinguished between what they saw and what they were told, but not always. Sometimes descriptions blur. When a missionary describes a lake creature of extraordinary size, is he repeating an indigenous warning? Is he describing an unusually large but ordinary fish? Or is he interpreting something unfamiliar through the lens of European myth? Indigenous oral traditions in the Great Lakes region long predated European arrival. Stories of powerful water beings, horned serpents, and guardian spirits were part of cultural frameworks that explain natural forces. To European missionaries, these stories existed somewhere between theology and zoology. They did not necessarily dismiss them outright. They recorded them, and in recording them, they preserved something. Some researchers argue that many of these massive creatures can be explained through exaggeration, translation errors, or misidentification. Lake sturgeon, for example, can grow to impressive sizes over 7 feet long and weighing hundreds of pounds. In dark, shifting water, a large sturgeon surfacing could appear prehistoric. Moose, elk, black bears, all larger than most European animals, would have seemed almost exaggerated in scale. But there are descriptions that feel less easily categorized. Reports of movements in water without visible fins. Descriptions of animals behaving in coordinated or unnatural ways. Accounts of beings associated with specific geographic locations. It is possible that some of these descriptions reflect early encounters with species that were later hunted to near extinction. The ecology of the Great Lakes region in the 1600s was not identical to today. Animal populations were denser, habitats were uninterrupted, What seemed impossible to European readers may have simply been abundance. It is also possible that missionaries, like all observers, interpreted events through cultural filters. Europe in the 1600s still carried strong traditions of sea serpents and monstrous creatures at the edges of maps. The unknown was often filled with forms drawn from imagination. When a missionary saw something unusual in fog-covered water, the mind may have reached for familiar mythic categories, but the key detail remains. These accounts were written down. They were not campfire retellings recorded centuries later. They were contemporary documents sent across the Atlantic, and they show that early European observers did not always feel certain about what they were seeing in the Great Lakes region. The wilderness was not empty to them. It was inhabited by people, by animals, and by forces they did not fully understand. The Jesuit Relations do not prove the existence of unknown creatures. They do not confirm monsters. What they confirm is uncertainty. They confirm that the edge of the mapped world felt unstable, that lakes appeared vast enough to hide anything, that forests seemed deep enough to conceal forms never cataloged. When we read these accounts today, we are reading layered narratives. Indigenous knowledge filtered through translation, European worldview layered over unfamiliar ecosystems, fear mixed with documentation, history intertwined with interpretation. Were these misunderstandings, exaggerations, records of unusually large but ordinary animals, or glimpses of ecological realities that no longer exist in the same form? There is no clear answer. What remains are the documents, written in careful script, shipped across oceans, archived, and preserved. They remind us that when Europeans first entered the Great Lakes region, they did not encounter a blank landscape. They encountered scale, depth, and a wilderness that resisted easy explanation. If you're interested in more primary source Great Lakes history, where documentation meets uncertainty, subscribe. Some things were written down because they were ordinary, others were written down because they were not, and sometimes the difference is still